I'm Jane, and I'm very honored to be presenting to you. And I'm just going to jump right in. I have about 30 minutes or so of narrative, and then I hope that we still have some time for comments and questions. So my presentation is based on the final chapter in my book, Postpartum is Forever: Social Support from Conception through Grandparenthood. It is called Grateful for Grandparents because I had a close relationship with my own grandmother, and now I am grateful to have 8 grandchildren. Today, in fact, is our eldest granddaughter's 27th birthday. What I have learned from being a granddaughter to becoming a grandparent is that everyone who navigates reproduction and aging deserves and needs social support. Like the majority of grandparents throughout the world, I enjoy my role and responsibilities with all of its emotional highs and lows. Remember, grandparents have feelings too. I'll begin with a brief history. Here are a few facts. Since the start of humanity around 30,000 years ago, the number of humans who live long enough to be grandparents has indeed increased. Longevity is largely the result of improved medical technology and healthy living conditions. Family knowledge, information, and wisdom are passed down through grandparents to help to preserve us. It is believed that the reason to have 3 generations living together is for human survival. From an evolutionary perspective, cooperative parenting may have offered critical advantages for human survival and reproductive success. Researchers have concluded that grandparents are consequential family members who influence the long-term emotional well-being of their grandchildren, play a pivotal role in early family relationships, and may protect young adults against mental health risks. In the past and in all cultures around the world, female relatives, especially the pregnant woman's own mother, have traditionally been important sources of social support during childbearing and rearing. This is called alloparenting, and it means that other than the parent is giving care. Humans have evolved adaptive sociocultural perinatal relationships for survival of their offspring in order to demonstrate how to mother, to provide breastfeeding support, and promote postnatal health and well-being. It was strictly a female-only role. However, changes began to happen at the end of the 20th century. Now society is witnessing changing demographics of intergenerational relationships and grandparent roles. It is called the Gray Dawn. Grandparents, including grandfathers, are being recognized as important sources of support and stability in the face of major family upheavals throughout life, not only in the perinatal period. This comes from public concern and social trends about how separation, divorce, and remarriage impact and affect children. It is part of a growing awareness about the impact of grandparents on the entire family system. It explains why grandparents are becoming more involved and important. Here are some more facts. Men and women are spending almost half of their lives as grandparents, witnessing their grandchildren becoming adults. The average age of becoming a grandparent is 50 years old for women and a couple years later for men. I was 50 and my husband was 53 when our first 2 grandchildren were born. The age of today's grandparents may range from 30 to 110 years, and grandchildren age from newborns to retirees. Most grandparents have multiple grandchildren, between 5 to 6 on average. The first stage of grandparenthood journey begins with grandparents to be. The age at which impending grandparent starts plays a role in their range of emotional reactions to the news. Grandparent to be emotions can include happiness and joy and/or feelings of ambivalence, shock, and resentfulness. This change may reawaken feelings both positive and negative of one's own youth, including the excitement and/or trauma of giving birth postpartum issues, and memories of the parents-to-be when they were infants and growing up. At an age when adults may be appreciating a newfound freedom, new grandparents-to-be face and the reorientation towards participating in their children's and now their grandchildren's lives. They have no control over an event that presents them with a new role and new responsibilities. The pregnancy may bring up concerns about interference, ambivalence, or willingness to follow the lead of their children, or an effort not to be seen as meddlesome. Some may not want to be or may not be able to be part of their regular everyday support system as expected or requested by the new parents. There can be confusion based on non-verbalized assumptions and disappointment when expectations are not met. Impending grandparenthood may trigger thoughts of advanced aging and dealing with the loss of their own ability to reproduce. They may still have responsibilities for parenting their own other children while becoming grandparents, and the need to care for or have responsibilities for their own aging parents. Other factors are financial circumstances, cultural and ethnic expectations, values, and beliefs. The onset of grandparenthood causes stress because the addition of a new family member affects everyone and requires considerable role changes. It may bring up memories of their own experiences being grandchildren and past relationships with their own parents when they were children. While this transition is considered a central part of the normal aging process, it can include anxiety, stress, and vulnerability. At the same time, entering grandparenthood can express a sense of solidarity, affection, and pride. In other words, it is complicated. While most grandparents are involved and satisfied with their roles, there are times and experiences that are challenging. The following scenarios are examples of some emotional ramifications of becoming a grandparent. The first, I am a 63-year-old grandmother and have been in therapy over the last 8 months. The birth of my first grandchild, who's now 3, has triggered a relapse of my own postpartum depression experienced 30 years ago. I need to talk with someone who understands what I'm experiencing. I'd like to join a support group. Second, my daughter gave birth 2 months ago, and she must be hospitalized for her severe postpartum depression. Her doctor yelled at her husband for not supporting his wife. I'm worried about them, overwhelmed by how to help everyone, and struggling myself to set boundaries. And my husband is still working. Third, my grandson's 7-month-old, and my son and his wife need help. Every time I suggest when I can come over, they have a reason not to accept my offer. I think they may be getting depressed, and I certainly am feeling anxious about the situation. Fourth, I've been cut off completely. They won't let me talk or visit ever again. I sent a gift when the new baby was born, but it was returned. I'm in shock. What do I do now? While all of these are worthy of discussion, I want to address this last extreme example of what is called grandparent alienation. There are situations that occur when grandparents are having difficulties being included. They have been unreasonably denied opportunities to spend time with their grandchildren and are completely cut out of their lives. It can be considered a type of elder abuse, causing trauma, terrible emotional pain, loneliness, grief, and loss. Why do some new parents set boundaries that exclude the involvement of their parents? This could be about jealousy, adult sibling rivalry, or power and control based on arguments prior to the pregnancy. Perhaps there was an ultimatum set by one spouse about direct or implied interference by a new grandparent. It could be withholding or threatening to withhold contact unless the grandparents agree to provide financial or other support in exchange. It is a form of blackmail known as coercive control. It is a tragic consequence of problems including untreated mental illness, substance abuse, unresolved trauma, or conflict between family generations. It can also happen when relationships break down because a primary care parent moves away and or doesn't value their former in-law's role as grandparents after divorce, remarriage, and the forming of blended families. There may be a sense of competition between the biological and the non-biological grandparents and produce an extreme example of intense mental distress. Some grandchildren may never even know that their grandparents are alive, and the grandchildren suffer the consequences. A child may reach out after the age of 18, but some grandparents may die before their loss can be resolved. Whatever the reasons for alienation, the effects on the child and other family members can be catastrophic, but particularly for the grandparents. Full-time grandparent caregivers are a segment of the grandparent population that is growing. These grandparents find themselves often unexpectedly raising a second generation of children because society and governments have intervened on behalf of the mental and physical well-being of the children. There's an emerging priority to identify strategies to support the health and the well-being of caregiving grandparents. Adult children may co-reside with the family, but have relinquished most parenting responsibilities to the grandparents. The term used for these families is grand families. These grandparents have taken on the custodial caregiver role because of parent incarceration, death of the biological parents, mental or physical illness, abuse and neglect or abandonment, substance abuse, and teen pregnancy. These factors, as well as separation from birth parents, can lead to stress or trauma in children and can be associated with physical, mental, and behavioral health issues. Grandparents who act as both parent and grandparent must meet their grandchildren's needs while navigating challenging family dynamics and facing their own mental and physical vulnerabilities. Custodial grandparents are more likely to experience a decline in marital satisfaction than grandparents who are providing daycare or merely residing with their grandchildren. Reasons for marital problems include husband's jealousy about time spent with grandchildren, decreases in privacy and sexual activity, and more tension and arguments within the family. But what about grandfathers? Traditionally, men were not part of parenting until the 1960s, when the women's movement brought change in Western cultures about pregnancy, birth, and the perinatal period. Roles began to change. My husband and I were part of this social shift. This development meant that fathers, and other non-birthing partners, older children, and grandfathers were invited to become involved. It altered the traditional role of only having grandmothers assisting new parents. Men today are living longer than those in previous generations, and some projections suggest that grandfathers will have even more years to devote to grandparenthood than their predecessors. Few fathers remain grandchildless. According to U.S. national data, among men with children aged 40 years and older, nearly 94% are grandfathers. Notwithstanding these demographic realities, research on grandfathers is underdeveloped. There is growing research in family science literature that has investigated the value of grandparents in general, but gaps exist in understanding the role of grandfathers and its impact on men's development, well-being, and about how men age and masculinity. This imbalance comes from unequal research samples of men and women. What has been researched has largely been limited to understanding how grandfathers impact grandchildren, rather than understanding how grandfathers benefit from the interaction with grandchildren. It is important to understand men's interpersonal and intrapersonal interactions in caregiving throughout life. These include their involvement, engagement, responsibility, and accessibility. There is a barrier towards the importance of understanding grandfathering within the context of masculinity. Masculinity ideology refers to the performances of men and their behaviors that are supported through socially constructed norms located in culture, social groups, and social institutions. We do know that masculine identities include both beliefs and attitudes that are influenced by culture, which in turn influence expectations and roles. The purpose of grandfathering includes: 1, to socialize grandchildren to the dominant culture, family roles, and responsibilities. 2, to serve a supportive function like a safety line to be extended when needed. And 3rd, Grandfathers offer support out of necessity during times of crisis and in the absence of parents. In a 2016 article titled 21st Century Grandparents, Global Perspectives on Changing Roles and Consequences, states that, quote, changing gender roles is also shaping grandparenting itself. When referring to grandparents, the underlying assumption has been that we're talking about grandmothers. Yet today's grandfathers are actively involved with their grandchildren given the opportunity. There is now an assumption that their role is equal to that of grandmothers. Grandparenting today is an expression of support and care to others, and at the same time, it promotes their own well-being. What are the major barriers and challenges for all grandparents? When I compare my own grandparenting experience with that of my grandmother's, I am grateful to be living in the 21st century. She left Odessa as an 8-year-old with her widowed mother and siblings in 1890. They never saw their grandparents again. Today, distance continues to be the biggest barrier to seeing grandchildren. Our eldest grandson and his sister live in Denmark. Fortunately, through technology and ease of travel, we bonded with them at an early age. The frequency of visits was limited, but so was it with the grandchildren who live only 300 miles away from us. Besides distance, busy work schedules are a challenge. By learning to communicate and coordinate calendars, grandparents are finding ways to spend time to connect with their grandchildren with increased technological savviness. Virtual opportunities using texting and FaceTime have helped with these challenges, although nothing replaces the in-person interactions. Trips with children without their parents is known as skip gen travel. In our family, we call it grandparent camp. In conclusion, I want to read what a grandfather wrote to our local newspaper. I quote, as a 65-year-old father of 6 wonderful children, I thought I knew it all when it came to babies and parenthood. Our 5 oldest children had married and produced 15 grandchildren. When our youngest daughter had her baby boy, everyone was ecstatic and happy. So we thought. But shortly after the birth, we noticed she was crying often, wanting others to care for the baby. She had a look of despair in her eyes. Everyone in the family sensed something was wrong. Fortunately, so did she, and she consulted her doctor. My oldest daughter came home one evening and said, Dad, Michelle has postpartum depression and we all have to help her through this. She explained how it was not her fault and someone, whoops, I just scrolled too quickly. Hold on. Let's see, the days later, the new mom, Dad, Michelle, this is the oldest daughter speaking. Dad, Michelle has postpartum depression and we all have to help her through this. She explained how it was not her fault and something beyond her control, probably caused by a change in hormones, and it affects many mothers. I had never heard of such a thing. Days later, the new mommy called excitedly to inform me that she had just spoken to a volunteer with PEP, Postpartum Education for Parents, and that there was a support group in Santa Barbara for women with postpartum depression. My first reaction was, can I come? So the following Thursday, mother, father, baby, older sister, and grandpa attended. Upon leaving our first meeting, I felt a great burden lifted from me. All the doubts and the thoughts I had about my daughter. Was she just being lazy? Was she being selfish? Was she jealous of the attention the new baby was getting? It all vanished. My message for grandpas is to go with your daughter or daughter-in-law to a support group. You will be glad you did. Thank you for your attention.